In Peru, electoral authorities have finally concluded processing 100% of the ballots cast in Sunday's presidential election, with leftist Pedro Castillo maintaining his lead over far-right candidate Keiko Fujimori. Amid activist protests, the leaders of the 7 leading capitalist economies began their summit in England, their first in-person talks in nearly 2 years. Palestinian and foreign activists demonstrated in East Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood this Friday against Israeli occupation and settlement activities in the Palestinian territories. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Peru, where electoral authorities have finally concluded processing 100% of the ballots cast in Sunday's presidential election, with leftist Pedro Castillo maintaining his lead over far-right candidate Keiko Fujimori. Less than a percentage point of the ballots processed remain to be counted. Castillo currently has an advantage of almost 60,000 votes over Fujimori in what has been one of the closest presidential races in the country's history. Meanwhile, Fujimori is attempting to have 200,000 votes annulled, alleging fraud with no proof whatsoever. All international observer missions have denied any significant irregularities witnessed in the process. The Free Peru Party has called on the National Jury of Elections to make an official statement following reports that it was planning to change the rules relating to the deadline for the presentation of challenges to voting tallies. The officially established deadline expired on Wednesday, but the electoral authority is said to have decided that the deadline would be extended until 8 p.m. this Friday. The decision comes as the Popular Force Party of Keiko Fujimori, who according to the processed votes lost to Pedro Castillo by a small margin, is trying to have more than 590 requests for votes to be annulled accepted, despite being submitted after the established deadline. Bolivian President Luis Arce took to Twitter to congratulate leftist candidate Pedro Castillo on winning the presidential elections in Peru. In his tweet, President Arce said Bolivia joins the celebration of the Peruvian people and congratulates brother Pedro Castillo, president-elect of Peru, a country with which we share history and culture. The Patria Grande, or the Great Homeland, joins forces to continue the fight for tomorrow with justice and equality for the people, he tweeted. The Bolivian government has denounced that the former Ecuadorian administration of Lenin Moreno provided weapons of war to the regime installed in Bolivia following the 2019 coup against President Evo Morales. On Thursday, the Bolivian news agency published an official document from Ecuador's Ministry of Government, in which it's revealed that the Moreno administration provided the regime of Janine Áñez with a total of 5,500 grenades and almost 3,000 projectiles in November 2019, the same month the coup was launched against Morales. The Bolivian Interior Minister revealed on Friday that the regime of Janine Áñez didn't just receive tear gas from Ecuador, as was already known, but also high-caliber ammunition to be used against the population. It should be recalled that after installing herself as president, the coup regime of Janine Áñez authorized the military to use force against protesters opposed to the coup. The relatives of the victims of the Sencata and Sacaba massacres are still waiting for justice.
We have seen that the Ecuadorian government provide tear gas to the government of Janine Áñez. However, we have unofficial information that it also provides high-caliber ammunition. We are talking about weapons of war. Surely the investigation will determine if they were purchased in a standard way or obtained irregularly.
Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula Silva has congratulated Pedro Castillo. He said, "I want to congratulate him on this important victory." He also saluted the Peruvian people for their free and democratic elections. The result of the Peruvian elections is symbolic and represents one step forward in the popular resistance in our beloved Latin America. Meanwhile, Ecuador's former president Rafael Correa expressed on his Twitter account, "Congratulations to Pedro Castillo and all the Peruvian people. A simple pencil defeated the millions and their corrupt press. The road is very difficult, but Peru will come out on top, ever onward to victory." The mobilizations continue in Colombia, where the condemnation and indignation sparked by police brutality and human rights violations are growing. On yet another day of protests, young people from public and private universities took to the streets. Our correspondent Hernan Tobar has the details.
After 45 days of strike action, demonstrations in the country continue. The National University of Colombia served as the meeting point for the new mobilizations in Bogotá. From here, young people marched in resistance, using the streets as their main stage to express their indignation and take a stand against the situation that the country is currently experiencing.
To continue demonstrating and to continue taking to the streets, because this population has to stop being indifferent faced with a war that is not visible in the cities, indifferent to the massacre that all this time has only affected the rural areas, indifferent to poverty, indifferent to the lack of education. It is time for a change, and this is why we are still here.
They, students from public and private universities, through art and street performance, criticize the ruling political class. Others, using music as a tool, intend to bring a message of change to the country, like Esteban, who with his baritone saxophone shows his nonconformity with a country of extreme inequalities and a lack of opportunities for young people like him.
Nowadays, being a musician is not about earning money from music, it's about giving hope. That is what being a musician means in the context of this strike. It has become a revolution. This is the real revolution, not guns. This is how we fight. With the art we perform, from our home, from what we can do at home, and from the art that each one has. That is the revolution.
This journey took them to the Attorney General's office, where they held a peaceful sit-in with chants and banners demanding that Attorney General Francisco Barbosa investigates the deaths of more than 70 people during the protests, of which only 20 are recognized by the office as related to public demonstrations.
We are protesting peacefully against the impunity for murderers. Throughout the strike, there's been evidence of people in white shirts killing demonstrators and indigenous people. There are also police officers recorded on camera killing people. Today, we are protesting against the state impunity for those police officers and those individuals violenting the people.
On Wednesday night, violent repression returned to cities such as Bogotá, leaving some 68 people injured. And to Cali, department of Cauca Valley, where police repression left at least 50 people injured and one demonstrator dead in the Andrés Sanín neighborhood. There were aggressions against medical missions that were reportedly attacked with gunfire in the south of the Colombian capital. All of this occurred while the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights was present in Colombia.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. This Friday, the leaders of the 7 leading capitalist economies began their summit in England, their first in-person talks in nearly 2 years. They were greeted by protests. The meeting was expected to begin with a pledge to donate 1 billion COVID vaccine doses to the world's poorest countries. This will ensure headlines, but the core of the matter is whether they will agree on lifting vaccine intellectual property rights so that jabs are massively manufactured at low cost in developing countries. G7 pharmaceutical concerns oppose this. They'll also discuss climate change. Studies say the 7 are poised to see their economies shrink dramatically due not only to the pandemic but above all greenhouse gas emissions produced by unrestrained overexploitation of natural resources. The G7 boss, US President Joe Biden, is expected to hold crucial meetings during his week-long European tour among them an encounter with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Switzerland. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on those who hold the power to come together and organise a more effective response to the COVID-19 pandemic during a virtual press conference held on the sidelines of the G7 summit.
It is in the interest of everybody that everybody gets vaccinated sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, until now, it has been very unequal and very unfair the way vaccination is taking place in the world. But I'm encouraged by the announcements that were made in the run-up for this G7 meeting. This global vaccination plan would, of course, have to deal with questions of intellectual property, questions of licensing, but also with the supply chain to make sure that there is no disruption in the supply chain. Let's not forget that for each vaccine, there are probably more than 100 components produced in different parts of the world.
Meanwhile, the issue of vaccine patents moved the London-based charity organisation Oxfam to stage a protest. A giant syringe greeted leaders on arrival to the summit, representing the urgent need for massive production of jabs around the world.
I think it's really important to understand that every single successful vaccine was funded by public money. Billions of subsidy from the taxpayers of the US and Europe funded these vaccines. These are our vaccines. They do not belong to pharmaceutical firms. This is not their own private investment. And we're also not saying they shouldn't make a profit. We're just saying they shouldn't make monopoly profits, excessive profits. We've created 9 new vaccine billionaires in the last 6 months. So it's not about not making money, it's about not making excessive money and allowing the market to develop and have other manufacturers all over the world make these vaccines and save lives.
Outside the G7 summit's venue in Carbis Bay in the southwest of England, both Biden and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson became characters in a protest led by the environmental group Extinction Rebellion. These people represented billions in demanding the heads of the world's top capitalist economies undertake real action in reducing greenhouse gas effects and climate change. On Friday, the United Nations elected 5 countries to join the UN Security Council. There was no suspense surrounding the regular move this time around because all were unopposed. Brazil, the United Arab Emirates, Albania, Ghana and Gabon will start their terms on January 1st, replacing 5 countries whose 2-year terms end on December 31st. They will join the 5 veto-wielding permanent members of the Council, the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom and France. Winning a seat on the 15-member Security Council is considered a pinnacle of achievement for many countries, as it supposedly gives them a strong voice on issues of international peace and security. However, many countries have called through the UN General Assembly for reform of the system, noting that veto power has only served the national interests of those who hold it, who happen to be world powers. Meanwhile, Africa still faces the historical injustice of being excluded from permanent seats. Cuba announced the suspension of the acceptance of US dollars in cash in its banking institutions as of June 21st. The Director General for the United States at the Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs explained the reasons for the measure.
It is an unavoidable and indispensable measure that our banking and financial system has to take. There is no way to avoid taking it, and it is a measure that is also motivated by the United States economic blockade. Our people know, and the international community also knows, that the purpose of the blockade is to cause damage to the Cuban economy. It is to asphyxiate the Cuban economy, and to that end it seeks to sink the income of the population, to plunge the standard of living of the population, as was once written in an official State Department document, to sink income, to generate hunger, to cause misery, and to try to create a situation of instability among the Cuban population.
Panamanian maritime authorities are cleaning up an oil spill at Toboga Beach, a tiny wildlife-rich island in the Panama Bay. As usual, nobody knows who spilled the contaminating oil. As usual too, the Pollution Prevention and Control Department of the Maritime Authority in Panama reported that investigations on the incident have begun. Several samples of the product have been taken to be analysed and compared with the boats that are anchored in the area in order to find those responsible and fine them for this environmental pollution, the agency said. Officials also said that once they became aware of the situation, they activated a contingency plan to provide an immediate response.
We do not know exactly where it comes from. We assume that it is from one of the boats that was outside the Urabá island where the lighthouse is. And well, unfortunately, it was a considerable amount because with the rising sea we realized that it was quite a lot and it was dispersed on the main beaches of the island.
These spills have been happening. It is not the first one. We as residents, myself as a merchant, feel very affected because this is a tourist island and obviously the oil industry does not get along well with tourism.
And we have more news coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Friday, Palestinian and foreign activists demonstrated in East Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighbourhood against Israeli occupation and settlement activities in the Palestinian territories. In 1967, Israel occupied East Jerusalem, then annexed it, in a move never recognised by the international community. In 1970, the state enacted a law under which Jews could reclaim land in East Jerusalem they lost in 1948, even if Palestinians by then already lived on it. No such option exists for Palestinians who lost homes or land. On Monday, Israel's Attorney General refused to intervene in a lawsuit issued by residents of the Sheikh Jarrah neighbourhood to prevent Israeli settlers from evicting them from their homes, meaning their last recourse is the Supreme Court.
We are here in the neighborhood, the Palestinian neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in occupied East Jerusalem. We come here every week and to say no to the occupation, no to apartheid, no to ethnic cleansing. The Israeli government is planning to deport the indigenous people, Palestinian people, from their home in order to evacuate it for settlers, for Jewish settlers, for colonialists. We shall not give them the possibility to do so. We keep struggle against the occupation and apartheid and ethnic cleansing. We'll never give up.
The Syrian government has warned the United Nations on the dangerous Israeli expansionist and war policies. In a letter, the Syrian Foreign Ministry stated that Israel is a dishonest entity and poses a threat to regional peace and security, no less than Daesh, also known as ISIS or the Islamic State, the terrorist group that failed in dismembering Syria. The ongoing terrorist acts conducted by Israel against Syria and other countries in the region, which have intensified, especially in the occupied Palestinian territories, would have been impossible without the support and protection of the United States and its Western allies, the Syrian government stressed. On Friday, Morocco rejected a resolution by the European Parliament which accused the country of using migrants to apply political pressure on Spain as part of a weeks-long diplomatic crisis. The resolution tabled by Madrid slams Morocco for its perceived role in the sudden influx of thousands of asylum seekers into the Spanish territory of Ceuta in May. The event frustrated Spanish politicians, officials and media who accused Morocco of blackmailing Spain amid the crisis between Rabat and Madrid. This came after Morocco accused Algeria and Spain of colluding to help Brahim Ghali, president of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, which continues to struggle for its self-determination and independence from Morocco, enter Spanish territories where he received treatment for COVID-19.
Morocco considers that the crisis is bilateral. The crisis is political. The crisis is with Spain. Morocco is satisfied with its relation with the European Union in all areas. Morocco, of course, considers that this resolution is part of an instrumentation of the European institution and the Parliament in particular in relation to an issue that is not within the competence of the European Parliament.
Mali announced a new transitional government on Friday in which key roles were retained by army figures, according to a statement. Military officers have received the strategic ministries of Defence, Security and National Reconciliation. The announcement comes after Assimi Goïta, who led a second coup in less than a year last month, was named transitional president on Wednesday. He appointed a civilian as his prime minister, in keeping with regional and international demands, and said that he would stage elections next February. Africa is heading into a third wave of coronavirus infections as the least inoculated continent faces a shortage of vaccines. In an online briefing, the director of the Africa Centres for Disease Control and Prevention said that African nations reported 94,000 new cases in the past week, a 26% increase. The executive also warned that the strain identified in India is spreading rapidly in at least 13 of the 55 member states of the African Union. South Africa reported the highest figures, followed by Tunisia. The World Health Organization reiterated that if the continent does not receive the necessary vaccines, only 7 of Africa's sovereign nations will achieve the goal of vaccinating 10% of their population by September. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram, plus you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.